I'm Matt Hagman, and this is Opportunity Miami, a podcast about people and ideas shaping Miami's economic future. There is a big talent gap in tech today, and it's growing. By one estimate, it's set to grow to more than 85 million by 2030. Meanwhile, income equality continues to grow across the U.S., and in particular, there is a wide racial wealth gap. As one example, there are huge inequities in how the companies of the future are being built. Black founders this past quarter received not even 1% of venture capital funding nationwide. If we are to build a uniquely diverse, inclusive, and skilled workforce and startup and tech community in Miami, these are issues we must address. But can we take the need for many more trained tech workers by expanding opportunity to populations who have often been left out? Stepping into the center of this is an entrepreneur who moved to Miami during the pandemic, Chandler Malone, who launched a startup, Bootup, which aims to help people, often with little background in tech, navigate the rapidly expanding world of boot camps and vocational training programs to gain tech skills and jobs in a matter of months. All the while, drive social mobility and fill that growing tech talent gap going forward. Chandler joined us to talk about expanding opportunity, building the tech workforce of the future, and about his new home, Miami. Chandler Malone, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
So happy to have you. This is a long overdue conversation. So I want to do a couple things. One, I want to talk about talent development. Two, I want to talk about building a truly diverse ecosystem and driving social mobility and addressing the social inequality we see across our country. And three, I want to talk about Miami. I mean, you moved here during the pandemic. Now it's home. Talk about all your experiences here in Miami. Before any of that, I want to talk about you and just your story.
Yeah.
So, where'd you grow up? You're already on your third business now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, thank you so much for having me, Matt. Name's Chandler Malone. Grew up in Dallas, Texas. I think the most important part of my time in Dallas, my mom just did an incredible job of placing me in very diverse and very different environments. So I had opportunities to, play sports where, I'm flying on private jets and spending times with, sports teams, owners, kids, but also, spending time running track and playing football, in situations where my mom was buying peanut butter and jelly, and bread and eggs, for my teammates. Yeah. And so that definitely just shaped my worldview a lot, at a young age, like as a preteen and as a teenager. So I went to school in St. Louis, at WashU in St. Louis. Went there to play basketball. Started a company though, basically just
at 19, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Your first one.
Yep. Started an events business. We started off just throwing small college parties, but ultimately grew to start bringing in Billboard top 10 artists to St. Louis, groups like the Chainsmokers, Kazette, others. And so with that being my first taste of entrepreneurship, and things being successful and things going well, I feel like that just made me hungry to keep doing it.
You're all in.
Yep.
So it's entrepreneurship and basketball.
Exactly.
At WashU.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say super blessed for the first entrepreneur experience to go so well, because I think I may have had a little bit more apprehension going forward if the first one hadn't been.
I can imagine. For sure.
Yeah, but that was a super great experience. While I was doing that though, I took a class where I had to write 25-page research papers on Snapchat and Square, now known as Block. I'm going to the barbershop, able to use my credit card for the first time ever. So I'm interacting with this product every day. And the person who developed it was a professor at the university that I was at. And so when I'm seeing the scale and cultural impact that this small product is having, I also feel proximity to it, like I could go do that, myself. And then, with Snapchat, wrote a 25-page research paper on them as well. Same thing, right? I'm using Snapchat every day at this point in time. The founder's in his early 20s. I'm in my late teens, right? And so this proximity and exposure gave me this feeling of like, oh, I can go do these things for myself.
Wow.
Went to then basically go try to start a software company. And so I knew about events, and so I said, let me go try to do that and put it all on your cell phone. We called that company The Moves, built it to over 80,000 users, had over 500 events on the platform, ultimately ended up selling it, sold it for less than the valuation that we raised at, so not, a big success, but definitely a huge learning experience just in managing a product team, going through the acquisition process, all of those types of things. ended up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, working with a fund called Atento Capital. We invested both into emerging venture capital funds, but also directly into companies. There had an opportunity to lead out our direct investments arm and met some really great companies, learned a lot. But in those first 2 deals that I led them into these 2 types of companies called boot camps. And so what boot camps are these non-traditional technology training programs. Typically they're condensed from like a 4 to 6 month period of time. Oftentimes you don't have to pay up front. You only pay when you get a job. And I was very adamant about us doing those deals in Oklahoma because Oklahoma is a state where you have more people with college degrees leaving the state every year than coming into the state every year. And so if you wanted to be able to build a technology ecosystem, you had to be able to support talent. And so finding these abbreviated, more accessible models to be able to bring to the local ecosystem it seemed like to me like kind of the first thing that we needed to do.
That's what then led to the big idea, right? Or this next idea.
100%. 100%.
Talk about that. And as I understand it, it's essentially, on the one hand, we have this huge opportunity. Yep. By 2030, there are millions of jobs. What's the three?
There's a projected 85 million person gap in the tech industry. I will say though, with the current, just dynamics that we see in the market, I don't know if that gap is actually going to be that high.
Because these layoffs we're seeing right now. Let's get to that. We'll talk about that. But huge gap, whether it's 20 million or 85 million by 2030, huge need for trained tech workers. And so you saw that as a huge opportunity. But meanwhile, is there a way to provide, particularly with people who have limited tech skills, to provide a way in which they can get training really quickly, affordably, to get many of those jobs, right? And
exactly.
Along the way, drive social mobility, talk about all that. But talk about where this idea came from.
Yeah.
And Bootup, which is, you're now building.
Definitely. So Bootup is the company that I'm working on now. Basically what we've done is we built a marketplace, right? And so an individual who's looking to just level up in life, right, can come to Bootup, take a survey, get recommended to the best job training program for them based upon what skill sets best for them, but also based upon where they're at in life. Once they go through the program, we support them with software tools and resources through the job search process, and then we'll work with employers to actually get them placed into their first job. And so, where the idea really came from, right, is education. We can always have this philosophical debate about why people go to school. At the end of the day, we do it to be able to provide for ourselves, to provide for our families. Yes, there is a quest and a thirst for knowledge, but there's also just basic survival that we have to do.
Sure.
And so, for me, that basically made me understand, right, we've got to win over enterprise adoption first because the employers are who decides what education is fit. And so basically we came out of the gate just placing boot camp candidates into jobs. And so that was super fruitful for us. We were able to get folks into top companies like Microsoft, Accenture, Dell, JP Morgan, Best Buy, just to name a few. And then from there, we really realized, right, the biggest opportunity is getting people into the training programs. Once folks are in the training programs, they have great outcomes, better outcomes than a lot of times folks coming out of four-year universities. How do we help get more people into the training programs? And so, that's basically where we're at now with our product. We've helped over 1,700 people get their first jobs in tech for almost $140 million in annualized salaries and about a year and a half of work.
Got it. And so now how, in terms of both bringing on lots of different programs onto the platform, and then also then bringing on lots of people onto the platform, lots of customers, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so for the training programs, we basically just aligned incentives, right? So when we were just doing the job placement piece, many of these training programs work through what's called an income share agreement model, where someone signs up for the program, maybe the program costs $15,000, but the person's not responsible for paying $15,000 up front. They're only responsible for paying that money back monthly once they get placed into a job. And so for these boot camps, we're going to them saying, hey, we're going to help your candidates get placed and we're going to do it for free because we charge the employers. They're like, you're going to help us make good on our money for free? Of course we'll sign up.
Right.
And so when it came to working with the boot camps, that was a piece of cake. Like we really didn't have, any issues. And now even, working with them to have contracts for referrals into their programs, the amount that we charge is significant. But at the same time, It's less than what a growth marketing team would be looking to spend on a solution. And so we basically just position ourselves with the boot camps where we know who they are, we can get in touch with them, and then it's a pretty easy sales process.
And then for customer acquisition, bring customers on, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so we've got two methods, and one that I actually want to kind of talk a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So one, we're working with community organizations. So for example, want to give a huge shout out to Technology and Ted Lucas and some of the work that he's doing in Miami Gardens. No. I'm obviously inspired by what he's done in the community, but I'm very excited for what he is continuing and about to do, especially in the technology space in the community. But those types of organizations, right, that are working on workforce development, working on upskilling or tech training, those are great partners for us to be able to get candidates from to then go source them into training programs. Another place, though, and this is the one I want to go deeper on, is employers. So, for example, we're working with Best Buy right now to upskill some of their workforce. We think that is actually really going to be the future of this alternative education, is employers sponsoring and subsidizing their employees going to get the skills that they need to fill gaps, rather than going outside of the company to go find the talent to go fill those gaps.
Got it. And you can help the companies and the company's employees navigate what makes the most sense.
Correct.
What are the skills?
Yeah.
What are the skills that people are seeking that that make the most sense for these 85 million or however million jobs that need to fill by 2030?
Yeah, definitely. So software engineering is number one. You've got front end, back end. I recommend full stack for everyone. It just gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more upside in your career. After that, we're seeing tech sales. After that, we're seeing cybersecurity. After that, we're seeing data science. And so those are really the big roles where if someone's just looking for an opportunity, there are probably companies hiring those opportunities. One that I did not mention, and it's just a little bit lower on the list, but actually for entry-level roles pays the highest, is product design as well. And all of these things are roles when you just think about the world. Every company needs these things, right? No one thinks about Target as a technology company, but we all remember last decade, right, when Target was hacked and all of the credit card information was leaked, right? And that was a cybersecurity issue, right? Target needs cybersecurity, even though they are not seen as a technology company. You start to think about a company like Kroger, right? Kroger's got a team of over 600 data scientists, right? Because they've got to be forecasting what inventory is going to look like, and those types of things, right? And so as our world just moves into a more technologically centric place, all of these roles that you're hearing are going to become more and more prominent in companies that you don't think of in traditional technology, but just to run a business in today's world utilizes technology.
What's typically the time?
Yeah.
And then what's typically the cost? Because some of these courses, like a General Assembly, they're not cheap.
Yeah. So time, typically 4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months, standing start, you can be ready to go, have marketable skills to get a job.
Yep, and then the job search process, I'd say give yourself 2 months, to be conservative. And so we'll say 6 to 8 months total.
Okay.
So 6 to 8 months total. Typically these programs are between 15 to 25K, which also is why I think that the employer subsidized model is what's going to become more prevalent going forward. Because, right, as you stated, sure, it's more accessible than college, but $15,000, $25,000 is still a lot of money.
Oh, man, yeah.
And so,
No, if you have that sort of debt,
yep,
early in your career,
yep,
huge. Let's talk about the piece that we alluded to at the beginning, that right now, as we're talking right now, we're seeing Meta announced large layoffs. Twitter has announced large-scale layoffs.
Yeah.
How does this affect what we're talking about here, about someone who's building tech skills over 6 to 8 months to then get a job, and now has what are thousands of people out looking for jobs in tech? Is that really making a difference, or is this field so vast that not that big of a deal?
Yeah, so definitely want to give just the full transparent. So I remember in August, some companies did some big layoffs, and I went out on Twitter and I shared that there were 3 people getting hired in tech for every 1 person that was getting laid off. That is not the case anymore. These next 18 to 36 months are going to be very hard in tech, especially for someone who's entry level. Because you've got to think, right, a company like Meta, Facebook, one of the most difficult companies to get into in the world, just let 11,000 people go.
Right.
And so if someone's hiring, you've got 11,000 of the best talent in the world up against, someone who's, just getting started in their career. And so I don't want to discourage people, but I will say that job search process is going to be harder than it's ever been in our just kind of current era of tech. And I think it's important that people know that, and they don't just hear, oh, boot camp, get a job, and don't understand that these macro.
This is a moment here. Of course, it'll pass too. I mean, in terms of longer term, you build your tech skills. I'm imagining the argument is that over time, those jobs will be there.
Yep.
But this is just be ready right now. It's tough.
And I will say, even to that point, I think it's really important for people to be strategic about what skills they're gaining. And so I think two of just kind of the bleeding edge technologies that are going to be important for the next decade, no matter what happens over the next 3 years, are going to be machine learning, artificial intelligence, and they're going to be blockchain development. For folks that are listening and thinking about, getting into tech, those are two areas they definitely need to look into.
Wow. All right. Now, you've been really clear in doing this work. With Bootup, that the social mobility component. How in building Bootup, from how the funds you raised in your last funding round, to how you see the mission of the company, to addressing head-on social inequality, and particularly dealing with the racial inequality we have in our country. Talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. So want to tie it all back to mom. You think, going through life, there are friends of mine who are, I guess, not with us anymore. And there are friends of mine who are doing really well, working great jobs, right? And you look at how we were when we were 9 and 10, and like everyone was great kids. That just economic mobility piece, literally folks' life outcomes pretty much played directly into like what their parents were able to provide for them. And so, that's even just the place in like my mind and my heart of where like this and like where Bootup, is coming from. Technology as an industry, as a sector, is one of the highest in terms of mobility, but also one of the lowest in terms of barriers to entry. And so when you start thinking about
diversity.
Exactly, right? And so you start thinking about mobility, it's like, oh, here's a field that needs people so bad that they don't require you to have a college degree. People are coming in entry level, making twice what the U.S. national average is. Let's say you step out of working as an employee. In the entrepreneurship space, there is no more upside than building a technology company. And so being able to get more black and brown folks, and I will say this is also something I'm very thankful for in my time in Oklahoma, because it's not just black and brown folks, it's folks who are lacking access. And that's something I did not have a lot of exposure to before I moved to Oklahoma, giving those folks access, basically. And so, to kind of speak about what you alluded to, with our funding round, we raised our seed round. And the first company that I know, at least in my consciousness, to have raised a seed round from all black investors. And so my thought process there was that, not that I wanted to exclude anyone from our round, but if you look at the racial wealth gap from the civil rights movement until now, black Americans have not made up any ground. We've actually lost ground since the civil rights movement. And for me to be in a place where I can be building a company that is giving people job opportunities, putting money in people's pockets, if we can finance that by people who I know are going to finance more black and brown people who are starting companies, if we do well, they're able to do that even more.
100%. Wow. So talk about with Bootup how you're being intentional about driving that social mobility that you want to see.
Yeah. So it's funny because we don't do any marketing specifically towards black and brown people or specifically towards women, but 78% of our candidates are underrepresented. And then 46% of those candidates are women. Wow. And the women number I also want to highlight because currently 19% of university computer science graduates are women. And so while that 46% number for us isn't a 50-50, it's 2.5x, basically what our institutions are giving us right now. And the reason why we're able to achieve those numbers without actively like marketing in a certain type of way is because the pathway is more accessible, right? You create something that is more accessible, you're going to see more representation, right? Like it's not anything like super cerebral or difficult to, kind of understand, right? Like people are smart, people want better for themselves, people want better for their families. You give them the opportunity, the people that want that will take that.
It was just, last month or last quarter, TechCrunch reported that black founders received less than 1% of all venture capital funding in the U.S., right?
Yep.
We have a real problem.
Yeah.
Where do we start with that?
Yeah.
Or where do we go next in
Yeah.
that work?
So I will say, really big question, but I would say one that I'm super passionate about, and not to keep going back to it, but really also appreciative of my time in Tulsa as well.
Yeah.
Because
Tulsa's special.
That was an initiative, right? Of like, hey, we have something specific that we want to do, specifically around getting a certain type of entrepreneur here and getting them out in front of the community to create a culture and an environment and an ecosystem. And so, you know, in Miami, I think that there are going to be a couple things that need to happen. Yes, the talent piece needs to just be further integrated into folks' communities. But at the same time, I know this even with people in my own personal life, right? They're like, oh, it seems like you're doing super well for yourself. But then when I say, hey, here's a great pathway, you know, there isn't necessarily the impetus to go. And there isn't always the impetus to go because people don't know what it looks like on the other side. I think to solve that, I think you actually do need to have more entrepreneurs here. And when I say more entrepreneurs, I mean venture-backed and funded. And I think that can be done in a couple ways, but I think what Miami has a really opportunity is that Miami's a destination.
Yeah,
and so you've got a lot of folks here locally who are building things where if there was capital that was specifically looking for them, they would be able to take off and do great. Then you've got another demographic of people who are exceptional and looking to build anywhere and really just looking for a home in a community. And if you go out with the understanding, right, that if you're from outside of Miami and you're a black or brown entrepreneur, we want you to come to Miami with this capital. But also, you're not just coming to Miami with this capital, you're joining this community to build a more inclusive ecosystem. Then now all of a sudden you've got the kid who's 20, sees the 25-year-old who just raised $3 million and interacts with that person a couple times a month, right? And then that 20-year-old's not like, oh, I did a Microsoft Word certification, that didn't help me. That person's like, I know a 25-year-old who's got $3 million in the bank and a team of 15 people, and they did it with this skill. This gives me a reason to really get into it and go do it, you know? And so I think being able to have funds earmarked for black and brown founders in Miami specifically at the earliest stages, but also with an understanding that maybe we do need to bring some folks in, you know, as well, just to be able to create the return profile so that we can continue to do this over and over again, I think would be huge. And then I think the last thing, right, is Miami has so much culture, and not just in the entertainment space, right? But I think that's something that Miami's known really well for. Being able to leverage the cultural icons that are here so frequently and helping them to drive technology as a part of a conversation for how someone can build a very successful life, I think is another advantage that Miami has that really could be played into that hasn't been as much as, you know, maybe some other markets, right? You think all these celebrities have funds, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
well, Pharrell with Black Ambition here.
Yep. And that's been wildly impactful, right? And it's like, you got one of those, you know, here. And I think that, you know, you look at your San Franciscos, you look at your New Yorks, you look at your LAs, and a lot of those markets, they don't just have one accelerator or one fund or one program that's specifically focused on black and brown founders. They've got a number of them, and they all work together and collaborate. You know, my thought process would be something where, you know, you're writing, you know, checks from like 250 to 600K, depending on check size. You know, if a company's from out of town, that they need to move to Miami. If the company's in Miami, obviously, you know, you want them to stay. And then, you build a community around it, right? I love what Atlanta Ventures has done.
Atlanta, so that's a good model to think about. Atlanta Ventures, okay.
You think about the successes they've had. They had a company get acquired by Salesforce for $100 million. They were one of the only investors in Calendly. They've got a company that closed a Series D last year and another company that hit a unicorn valuation. They also run and operate the largest like incubator co-working space. And so their whole thing is, they say we're community, capital, and what's the other thing? And content. But basically trying to educate, trying to get people in the room with other people, and then when you're ready, we've got that for you. Wow. And so I think being able to have that.
Something like that, and being real intentional about focusing on black and brown entrepreneurs.
Yep.
So, all right, to wrap up, Miami, this
Yeah.
is your new home.
Yeah.
How long have you been here? How's it going?
Yeah.
You enjoying it?
So moved to Miami in December. It's been great. Moved to a little Haiti area. Love the neighborhood. Also love just the proximity to all the places in town. People have been super, super welcoming. Came here knowing a few people, but not a ton. But I feel like I've been able to build a really strong community of folks who are, at the intersection of tech and finance, but also make friends outside of the space. Awesome. And yeah, man, it's been great being able to meet people like you. And I think that the city is doing a great job of trying to push and support people who are working really hard to build things to help other people. And I think, in general, that's something that you want out of a place where you settle. So,
well, all right. We always like to do at the close of our conversations 3 takeaways.
Yeah.
And so for this one, what are 3 takeaways for that person who doesn't have much experience or any experience in tech, but wants to build a professional life in tech? What should they be thinking about? What should be top of mind right now?
Yeah. So the first thing is this is definitely a difficult time, and learning something new and getting into a new space is always difficult. But at the same time, this is the space and career path that provides more freedom, more economic mobility than any others in today's current world. And so it's worth the effort, it's worth the grind, it's worth pushing through, the self-doubt, some of those difficult times. Definitely number 1. Number 2, it's definitely important to be strategic about the skill sets that you're learning. Right now, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain are 2 things that are going to be very important for our world over the course of the next decade. And so going deep on those skills, even if you're not a software engineer, even just being able to understand those spaces so that you can work as a designer in those fields, or so you can work in sales, in those fields, will be really important. And then the last piece is, everything is about community, everything is about exposure, right? My whole journey from the very beginning, right, started with this class and this entrepreneurial experience. And so for, someone who's looking to optimize their journey into this space, do what you can to get yourself in the rooms around people who are doing this. Whether they're virtual rooms online, whether it's, on Twitter or Reddit, or, whether it's in person, specifically in Miami, working, with the WinCode, the BrainStation team, or, working with the Iron Hack or working with the 4Geeks teams. And so, building community, and there's a ton of that here in Miami, is the last piece I would recommend.
Love it. But for this, let's make this an extra special podcast, a double-barreled takeaways.
Okay.
So for our second takeaways from this awesome conversation, for the person who really cares about building a truly diverse ecosystem, and particularly an ecosystem that propels Black and brown entrepreneurs, which we really think Miami can be that place.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
What are the 3 takeaways? What are those 3 things that should be top of mind if we're going to build that future?
Yeah. The first piece is that education is moving towards the enterprise. And so if we're going to want to have a really inclusive ecosystem, we're going to have to basically develop relationships, convince the enterprises down here to work with us to develop training programs to get more Black and brown talent into companies. It has to be an intentional effort. It's not going to happen by mistake. That's the first piece. The second piece is I think we need more funding for Black and brown entrepreneurs at the earliest stages. We've got a ton of growth stage capital, not a lot of early stage capital out here, right? And so, more early stage capital begets more wins. You look at other markets and we don't really have specifically any Black founders who have had, massive exits here in Miami. Being able to get more early stage companies funded here is going to result in more people in the community seeing the opportunities that this sector of the economy has in general. And so, that's the second piece. And then to go on a kind of like a point B for that second piece, you have a couple folks have exits and the work all of a sudden starts to get outsourced, right? Because the Black or brown person who went and built their thing and sold it for however many 100 million, however many billion, now they've got a bunch of liquid capital, right? And whoever was in their early company has a bunch of liquid capital. We know that we're likely to hire and work with people who look like us, right? Like, not from a place of ill will, that's where we're most comfortable, right? And so you think more Black and brown founded companies are going to have more Black and brown early employees who have exits, who are going to, or who have equity, who are going to walk away with, hopefully a couple $1 million. But then also what's that founder going to do with that capital? And so, I think getting more capital in the hands of founders, and then I think the last thing is trying to push tech into the cultural consciousness more, right? Like Miami is a center of cultural relevance, not just for the U.S., but for the globe.
Right. Totally.
And it's Miami, not all the people that come here, that is the influence, right? And so, being able to use that and push that into the community, but then also give that back out to the world, would create a situation where you've got more people winning in tech in Miami, but also you've got Miami's reputation on the global sector continuing to grow as a technology hub and ecosystem. And so I think those would be my three takeaways for folks looking to support the work.
Awesome. Chandler Malone, thank you.
Thank you so much, man. I'm sorry for being so
great.
long-winded, but I appreciate you, man.
This has been awesome.
Yeah.
It's been awesome.
Thank you for having me, man. Yeah.
Opportunity Miami is powered by the Miami-Dade Beacon Council. This episode was produced by our editorial manager, Suzette LeBoy, with special thanks to Clutch Content Partners. You can reach us with your story ideas and feedback at next@opportunity.miami. Thanks so much for joining us.